Hello and welcome to Math Chat. Mona here. And as you can see, I am in a hotel room. If you're watching on YouTube, I am traveling to Colorado this week to present at the Colorado Council of Math Teachers Conference. And so here I am. I got to record the podcast. Because today we are talking about one of the biggest questions teachers ask me after they start learning about Word Problem Workshop, which is, how do I fit it all into the math block? Because at the end of the day, you want the kids problem solving. You want discourse and building conceptual understanding while also building fluency and having time for reflection and intervention, all while keeping pace with the curriculum. And somehow you're supposed to fit all of that into the 60-minute math block. So today I want to simplify this because creating a classroom of problem solvers is not about adding more to your math block. It's about rethinking what students are spending most of their time doing during math. And honestly, that's the shift. That's what changes everything. Over time, I realized that classrooms where students were truly engaged in math consisted of 6 connected elements, not 6 separate programs, not 6 disconnected activities or ideas, but 6 instructional priorities that work together to help students become mathematically proficient problem solvers. And this idea connects deeply to the research in Adding It Up, Helping Children Learn Mathematics from the Research Council. I'll link the book in the show notes, but in that book, the mathematical proficiency is described as a braided rope, not a ladder, a rope. With each strand, I'm going to tell you what each strand represents in a minute, being braided together to create mathematical proficiency. So the 5 strands are conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, strategic competence, adaptive reasoning, and productive disposition. And early on in this podcast, I actually did a whole series on each one of those and what they mean. So I'll link those as well. But honestly, that image of all 5 of those strands being woven together is what helped me understand that math instruction isn't just one-dimensional. Because a classroom of problem solvers, when you're doing that, you can't just produce students who get answers, but you have to help them become strategic thinkers, adaptive reasoning. And that's not how we typically think about math class. I think one of the biggest myths in math education is that if students are struggling, we need to do more teaching. We need to explain more, model more, interrupt their thinking more to show them what to do. We need to scaffold more, right? Like it's all of the more. What do we need to do? But what I've learned from working in K-8 classrooms as both a teacher and a coach is that the students that are often behind don't become problem solvers by watching us solve. They become problem solvers by solving the problems themselves, discussing strategies, trying out ideas, revising those ideas, reflecting, and making sense of the mathematics. That means that your math block needs to do more than just center on the teacher talking and teaching. It needs more opportunities for students to think. And that's where the 6 elements come in. And I want to pause and say, I know you're already doing a lot of this, but if you're not, hopefully in this session, you can find 1 or 2 ideas to enhance that time for your students to problem solve and make sense of the math. So element 1 is thinking routines. And this is the first element that we do in our classrooms, in our math block. And also, wait, before I get to all of this, let me just say, for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to go in depth into each one of these elements. So today, it's a little overview, how we're going to fit it all together. And then going forward, we're going to get into each one in depth with lots of examples. So make sure you keep coming back each week so you can start to build out this math block and start the year with building that classroom of problem solvers. Okay, element 1, thinking routines. These are routines like number talks, notice wonder, which one doesn't belong, choral counting, same and different. Thinking routines, or also known as number sense routines, help students develop those habits of reasoning. I like to call them thinking routines because number sense routines, sometimes to bigger kids, is like, I already know my numbers. What do I need a sense of my numbers for? So call them thinking routines. It implies that this is all about the reasoning. I care about your thinking because they teach students to notice, to discuss their ideas, to compare, to listen to others' ideas and think about what they're doing, to make sense of their thinking. It's not something to race through. It's really doubling down on like, hey, we're going to start the class by reasoning, by talking, and it's going to build their conceptual understanding, their strategic competence, and over time, their procedural fluency. And this is because students are constantly noticing patterns, comparing strategies, defending their ideas, and making connections. And that's the kind of thinking that sets the tone for our math class, right? Students expect to start math by thinking in that way. So start with a thinking routine for 5 minutes. Element 2 is word problem workshop. This is kind of the heart of the classroom, in my opinion. And it's where students are solving math problems, a word problem every day. They're not just practicing the procedure. They're not just filling out the workbook pages. They're actually making sense of the math. This is where they're building all of those strands of math proficiency, like reasoning and strategic competence and conceptual understanding. And they're building a productive disposition, which means that they're feeling confident in their own abilities to do math, because this is where students learn to persevere. They learn to model their thinking, explain it to their friends, and then use other people's ideas to revise their thinking. This is why launch, grapple, share, discuss, reflect, the 5 steps of word problem workshop create a predictable routine that allows students to trust themselves. And one of the biggest teacher shifts that I've noticed in this is that students learn to problem solve. They are learning the math while problem solving, not after learning. Traditionally, and the way I was brought up was we would learn the math and then we would get the chance to apply it, right? That's a completely different vision of math. This one is where we use real world problems to teach our students the math. The grapple phase is often the part that transforms classrooms the most. It's the one that I work with teachers on first, because once teachers stop rescuing students immediately when they struggle and they start to empower them to see that in that struggle, they can find what they know and use it, that's when students realize that they're capable of far more than they ever thought possible. So after you finish word problem workshop, now it's time for element 3, strategic instruction. But how do I teach my curriculum? This is the instruction. This is where you go to your curriculum, but I have named it with an important name of strategic instruction. I want you to be strategic about how you use your curriculum. I don't want you to just open it up and start at the top and work your way to the bottom. Instead, you can think about the patterns that you notice. What did you see students connecting? How have students already achieved the learning goal based on your thinking routine and your word problem workshop? What further support do students need to achieve the learning goal? How can you intervene intentionally? How can you partner students, pull small groups to help students achieve that learning goal for the day? Strategic instruction means that we respond intentionally to student thinking instead of replacing student thinking. And what I mean by that is, instead of saying, cool, we just had our word problem workshop where you guys got to think and solve and do all that. Now sit down, open your book to page 67. I did that on purpose. And now let me show you what you should do. Now do that in your book. We can't have two different kinds of vibes, right? But we can say, I noticed that group of kids over there, they pretty much got it. They showed me their understanding. They're making the connection. I see they've pretty much mastered the learning goal for the day. I'm going to have them just work on the problem set in the workbook. Whereas this group over here is lost. So I'm going to pull them to the carpet with whiteboards and we're going to go through some problems from the curriculum. And I'm going to give some more direct instruction because that's what they need right now. They need that guided practice. Not everyone needs that. That's how we can be strategic about our instruction. This is where we think about how those small groups fit in, where intervention fits in, where our questioning fits in. This is one of the biggest mindset shifts for teachers, of not just trusting that the curriculum knows your students and just following it lockstep. Instead, the goal is, how do I help my students make sense of this more deeply using this lesson? Element 4 is purposeful fluency. The 4th element here, it matters so much. Fluency matters because true fluency is not just about speed. It's about flexibility, efficiency, and understanding. the connections between all of the numbers and all of the patterns. And so when students become more fluent, they actually make sense of the math. What I mean by that is they can decompose numbers. They're reasoning through strategies. They're connecting ideas. They're discussing relationships. I was just talking to my kiddo who just ended second grade, and he said, he was quizzing my younger daughter, and he said, "What is 6 plus 7?" And I said, and she didn't know. She was like counting on her fingers. She's in kindergarten. And he said, "It's 13 because 6 plus 6 is 12 and one more is 7. 7 is one more, so it's 13. I said, okay, we have some purposeful fluency happening here, right? Fluency is rooted in understanding, not just memorizing alone. He hadn't just memorized 6 plus 7. He was reasoning about how to get the answer. And that matters because students who understand the math and how to get an answer are far more likely to transfer and retain what they learn. Okay, the fifth element is student-engaged assessment. This is so important. In a community of problem solvers, assessment is not something teachers just do to students. Students are constantly reflecting on what they know and can do, explaining, self-assessing, and showing what they understand. And they are an active member of the assessment ecosystem within the classroom. Teachers are observing student thinking in real time. They're listening carefully to what students are saying they understand, what they don't understand. They're noticing their misconceptions. They're noticing their strategies. And students begin to see assessment as feedback, as part of the learning, not just as judgment or as a mark or as a way to communicate to their parents if they're doing well in school. But students start to see that they are involved in the assessment. This is where students build productive disposition in mathematics, seeing that they have the power over improving their outcomes and improving their understanding. They begin to see themselves as capable mathematicians who can grow their thinking. And element 6 is not the last one. In fact, I should probably move it to number 1, but it's identity and belonging. This is honestly the part that holds it all together. Think of this like the glue of the class, because none of this works if students do not feel safe enough to think publicly. Problem solving and doing mathematics requires vulnerability, even in 5-year-olds. Students need to believe my ideas matter here. Mistakes are part of learning. I belong in mathematics, and I'm capable of figuring things out. The kind of classroom culture that does this doesn't happen by accident. It's intentional. It's built through routines, through teacher moves, through teacher disposition, through discussions, reflections, and opportunities for students to contribute meaningful ideas every single day. If we only give students opportunities to contribute meaningfully once in a while, that doesn't build the identity and the belonging within our community that says, we believe you, we think you have good ideas. Once in a while isn't enough. And when students begin to see themselves as mathematicians, as people who have good ideas, who can do math, that's when everything changes. But a little caution, and we'll get into this in a future episode, that when a student raises their hand and gives an answer, that is not enough. That's a little like ... cliffhanger for you to come back. Okay, but how do we fit it all in? Because that is how we started this, right? These 6 elements are not separate. They overlap constantly. Thinking routines build that fluency. They build reasoning. Word problem workshop includes discourse, includes reflection, includes assessment. Strategic instruction happens during conferencing, in discussions, in small groups. Fluency develops our students' reasoning and strategy work that they then apply in word problem workshop and strategic instruction. Identity and belonging are built throughout our daily interactions and our opportunities for students to think. The goal, again, is not to cram all 6 of these into your math block. The goal is to create a math block where students spend most of their time thinking, talking, discussing, and solving, reasoning, reflecting, and making sense of math. That's the shift. And once those are the routine, the math block starts to feel calmer and not more chaotic, because students know that every day in math they're going to think, they will discuss, they will use tools, they will reflect, and they will have their ideas valued. So the most common thing that I hear teachers saying after they've implemented these routines is like, I'm talking less. My students are thinking more. When I do the talk, like it's in response to my students' needs. And those kind of comments are just absolutely the goal, okay? It's not a perfect script. It's not perfect answers. It's thinking and responding to student thinking. But I know you're all like, Mona, but what are the time blocks? So let's run through it. Let's do a thinking routine for 5 minutes. Let's do word problem workshop for 25 minutes. And then let's do strategic instruction for 25, 30. And then at the end, let's do an exit ticket. Let's do some sort of formative assessment that we can use to help assess to see who got the learning goal. Now, within that, we might also have 10 minutes for procedural fluency practice, like fact practice, or that might be in our thinking routine. Maybe when we're doing strategic instruction, our students are working on a fluency game. And throughout all of that, we're working in things like linking our character goals, our SEL goals to mathematics. I have courage in math. I am a member of a community. I respect the thinking of others. We're working in our SEL into our discussion during word problem workshop. We're working it into how we share materials at centers. It's got to be woven in. Now, if you have the first week of word problem workshop, it's like a $6 product on Teachers Pay Teachers, I think. I'll put the links here in the show notes. If you have that product, I actually have coursed out in there a daily SEL goal for how to incorporate identity and belonging into the rollout of word problem workshop. So in closing here, if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, yeah, that's the kind of math class I want you to know that you don't have to build it alone. You can absolutely start reading the book, Word Problem Workshop, 5 Steps to Creating a Classroom of Problem Solvers. And if you actually want to see the routines in action, I have a teacher training that walks you through it and gives you access to tons of classroom video and facilitation strategies and just to see it in action. So those are 2 options to learn more. Read the book or to get into the teacher training. Both are linked in the show notes, or you can find the links to them at monamath.com, because creating a classroom of problem solvers is not something you do alone, because it's a shift. And when we make shift in community, it works so much better. It's all about creating the conditions where students can think deeply every single day. So I would love to leave you with this. May you create a math classroom where students feel safe to think, discuss, revise, and make sense of math together. May you remember that productive struggle, discourse, and reflection are not distractions from the learning. They are the learning. And may you trust that the consistent opportunities you provide each day are helping students build far more than math skills. They're building confidence, curiosity, perseverance, and the belief that their ideas matter. See you next week, friends.